I'm a member of National Qualification Agency Ukraine, and I'm honored to moderate our discussion. Today we have 3 speakers from 3 countries, Estonia, Finland, and Ukraine. They will present experience, lessons learned from development, introduction of qualification framework. We expect that each speaker will talk for around 15-20 minutes. So we kindly ask all webinar participants to mute their microphones, sure, not key speakers. If you have a question, please write it down in chat. So after all the presentation, we will have time for answers. We kindly ask you to let presenters, speakers make their presentations without interruptions. I would like also to know that this is the first webinar in the set of online events scheduled for this autumn. And this webinar was organized by National Qualification Agency of Ukraine. And our idea was to set up an online platform for European experts to discuss, to share acute issues of qualifications. In this, our activities, we cooperate with EU for Skills program. And therefore, I would like to ask Roman Gorowy. Roman, are you with us?
Yes.
To say a few welcoming words to all webinar participants. Yeah, you're welcome, Roman.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with you today. I will be very brief. EU for Skills, it's a joint action of the European Union and its member states, Estonia, Finland, Germany, and Poland, to support the VT reform in line with the reform concept modern vocational education. So we provide support in several areas, and we closely work with NQA also in different areas. One of them is NQF. On the topic of FQF, we actually prepared a tender and hope that a company who wins it will start to work soon on 3 main packages. It's self-assessment on referencing NQF to AQF, implementation of the National Qualification Framework, different questions connected to it is the second big working package, and sectoral qualification framework, it's third one. So happy to be here today. I will be very attentively listening to the main speakers today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Roman, for being really brief. So now we are moving to our guests, to our speakers. And the first speaker is Carita Blomqvist. She is the head of the unit at the Finnish National Agency for Education. And the topic of her presentation, sure, about Finnish National Qualification Framework, its development and main features. Your floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning all. Best wishes from Helsinki. I'm really happy to speak to you. I wish I was in Ukraine, but it's not possible. I really want to mention in the very beginning that I used to spend there 1 year in Ukraine, but that was so long ago that the world has changed since. But it's always a pleasure to be able to address. And of course, I'm happy to talk about the Finnish experience and the National Framework for Qualifications and other competence modules, as we call it. I will now try to share my slides.
It works. Okay.
It works. Thank you.
Yeah.
And now you have the whole. Thank you. Thank you for confirming this. This is very helpful. and I'm happy it works. Indeed, I looked at the situation in Ukraine when preparing this. I looked a little bit at your national qualifications framework, and of course also the questions you sent to us, the speakers. So I will have a quite short presentation about the Finnish NQF, and then I will be happy to answer your questions after all presentations have been discussed. In Finland, I think we started for the national framework already sometime 2004, 2005. Then we worked on higher education qualifications frameworks. But then when the EQF developments started and when it was established, we very quickly went to prepare the overarching holistic framework covering all levels of education in Finland. And this work we started sometime in 2008, 2009. You may remember that the original EQF recommendation dates back to 2008, I think. And in the end, we decided to go, our government decided to go so that we would have a legal basis for the national framework of qualifications and other competence modules, as we call it, because it includes also other elements, not only full qualifications. The law, as we call it, Act, entered into force in March 2017. There was a long time in between, and we were not without NQF that time either, but it was simply, I would say, more like preparing law and all documents and making sure that the framework is being implemented in the field, in the educational field first and foremost, and so on. And these were the reasons why it took so long to have the law in force. But already before that, we had this framework and we tried to make it known. I would say that we had a good starting point in Finland for preparing the framework, and I'm sure all of you who are involved can to some extent sign to these things. First of all, we have a education qualification system which allows access from one level to another. We don't really, as we like to say, at least earlier we used to say that we do not have dead ends in our qualification system, education system. And of course, because framework is also about access, it was relatively easy for us to start preparing the framework. We also have one Ministry of Education, so in some countries there are issues between vocational education and higher education, for instance, but in Finland this is not so. We have one Ministry of Education as the governance structure. And also what I think was very important and made it smooth for Finland to prepare our national framework was the fact, and is the fact, that the secondary vocational education has for decades already given access to higher education. So there was no difficult discussion, as I see in some other countries, between higher education and secondary vocational education. And of course, very important from the point of frameworks is the learning outcomes. And in Finland, especially the vocational education and training has already for a very long time been competence-based or learning outcomes-based, as we say, and it made it easier for us to prepare the framework and discuss the descriptors for each level and the way of thinking that there are learning outcomes to be achieved and they have been already defined. Of course, we can always do better on different levels of education, but the whole idea of learning outcomes-based qualifications was there already in Finland when we started preparing our framework. And maybe the fourth aspect I would like to mention as an introduction is that we had a lot of well-established cooperation between labour market and educational sector, and this of course helped as well. The Act entered into force in 2017, and as said, it applies to all qualifications included in the education system, And what is unique, I think, for Finland is it's not only on qualifications under the Ministry of Education, but also qualifications under other ministries, most notably Interior and Defense. On top of that, our Act applies to what we call extensive competence modules, which are comparable with qualifications, the learning outcomes of which are in legislation or which have been specified as professional requirement for working in a profession, etc. So we have widened the scope of our NQF during last years. We have 8 levels. I think you have 10 in Ukraine, and this is of course our choice. Yours is yours, and there are variations between countries in the number of levels, and this is of course fine. Then to support the law, we have what we call government degree. It's kind of sub-law, and there we have written the descriptions of the requirement levels and placement principles. In practice, this means that there's an annex which lists all qualifications, how they are placed, what is placed on what level, and the learning outcomes and the descriptors for each level. And the level descriptors, as we call it, you have also other names to call it, but I'm sure you know what I mean. We have prepared them for all 8 levels of our framework, and we do not have any qualifications on level 1 so far, at least. And how we wanted to see these learning outcomes and the level descriptors is that our working group and our stakeholders, it was a very large consultation to prepare these descriptions. We wanted to go for so-called holistic approach, which means that we didn't identify separately knowledge, skills, and competence as many countries do. On the other hand, we were thinking of all of this, but we felt that to prepare the descriptor, the learning outcomes, and trying to indicate separately what is knowledge, what is skills, and what is competence, especially the division between skills and competence is rather vague sometimes and difficult to indicate. So we had some background documentation and discussion that there were several elements where these learning outcomes come from: knowledge, working method, application, responsibility, management, entrepreneurship, assessment, and also we included key skills for lifelong learning. It is definitely no secret that the Finnish NQF descriptors, they were modeled after the EQF descriptors. We considered them appropriate for describing also Finnish qualifications. One of the reasons is that we had been involved in planning and preparing these descriptors. All countries were participating in the process, so we felt they were familiar enough for us to take them on board. But we have complemented our descriptors with, for instance, language skills or some other elements to reflect our national features. Higher levels 6, 7, 8, they relate both to the EQF and the Dublin descriptors. Many of you are aware of the Bologna process and the higher education qualifications framework there. And this is taken care of in our framework. They are general, and what is also important to say that we have general descriptors for this national framework, and they are further specified by field in the national core curricula, and finally in the qualification requirements for each qualification separately. So the work continues on other levels, the work that has been done for the law. Just a quick look at the Finnish NQF levels. For level 2, we have basic education, we have preparatory education for working life independent living. Level 3, some preparatory studies. And I think what is important and interesting from this point of this for these seminars is the level 4, where we have placed general upper secondary school and the matriculation examination, upper secondary vocational qualifications, further vocational qualifications, and then some qualifications from other fields, other ministries, firefighter, prison services, emergency, border guards, officers. this is how it looks like for us for level 4. Level 5, we have what we call specialist vocational qualifications, the sub-officer qualification, air traffic control, some qualifications for officers from the Ministry of Defense. And level 6, quite familiar, bachelor. We have a binary higher education system bachelor degree at universities or applied sciences and the universities. And then we have included some what we call professional specialization programs provided by universities and university applied sciences. And we have some specialized training and pastoral qualification provided by the church on that level. Level 7, again, masters, both universities in applied sciences, and then again professional specialization, some officer courses, and some further studies in the under the Ministry of Defense, and a specific qualification on prescribing medicines under the Ministry of Social and Health. And level 8, our highest level, we have doctoral degrees, and then we have certain degrees from the Ministry of Defense again, specialist degree in veterinary medicine, and certain specialist trainings on highest levels. In the end, I want to give you as a reference, this is not, of course, so important from the point of national qualifications framework, but I think it helps to understand the placement of those so-called traditional qualifications that exist also in the education system schema, and we like to present the education system in the same context. There is a question concerning self-certification or referencing in the background document and in the invitation for this seminar, and indeed we have prepared our self-certification and referencing reports, and they have been, I would like to say, well received in the EQF advisory group and the relevant Bologna process groups, and you can find all these documents in English, of course, under the website of the qualifications framework for Finland. It is the website is under the website of our agency. So I think I will stop here my short presentation.
Okay.
I stopped sharing the document. I'm happy really to take questions also now, but I also understand if you want to go further immediately, I will be happy to stay, and I received some time for questions, but I will be able to stay until the end of the seminar, so as you wish. But thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, for your brief presentation, and being on time. It's very important when a speaker fits the time. Okay, dear colleague, we are moving to the next presentation. It will be about Ukrainian qualification frameworks, problems, issues of development and implementation. And I'm passing the word to Dr. Yuriy Rashkevych, who is a member of National Qualification Agency and ex-Deputy Minister of Education and Science. So, Anna Yuriy, вам слово.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am happy to be here and to present you some results of the development of our national qualification frameworks and present some challenges which we have today while we are trying to implement it into real practice. But let me first of all start from my presentation. Just a moment. Okay, do you see it?
Yes.
Yes, you see. Okay, thank you very much. So speaking about the challenges and problems which we have today with the implementation of the National Qualification Framework, I will start with the history of its creation, because it's quite complex, and even my colleague from Finland does not know exactly what is the current National Qualification Framework today. So the process of its development has started 10 years ago at the end of 2010. A specialized working group has been created by the Ministry of Education and Science. It's worked during the year, and in November 2011, by the special regulations, the Cabinet of Ministers has approved a Ukrainian National Qualification Framework, which included 10 levels and 5 descriptors. As you see on the slide, in addition to age levels corresponding to the levels of European Qualification Framework from level 1 to level 8, we have got also level 0, preschool education, and level 9, reflecting existing in Ukraine the second scientific degree, Doctor of Science. As for the descriptors, you will see 4 typical descriptors: knowledge, skill, communication, and responsibility and autonomy. In addition to those 4 descriptors, we have established an integral competency, so-called integral competencies. It is the general description of a level. Unfortunately, during next years, despite a formal approval, the framework has not been implemented in education and professional standards and programs. Only in 2014, it has been mentioned for the first time in national regulation, in the new law on higher education, which established the correspondence between levels of higher education and levels of national qualification framework. Since 2015, the National Qualification Framework has begun to be partially applied in state educational standards, although no further steps have been taken to self-certify it and to make it visible and operable at European level. So the time was lost, and in my opinion, one of the main reasons, at least for this, was the problem of establishing compliance of our 10 levels qualification framework with the European H-level qualification framework. In 2017, a new law on education further complicated the situation by introducing an additional level of education, professional pre-higher education. In this regard, the National Qualification Framework has been changed once more by adding additional 11th level, and we lost another 3 years. To implement the new law, appropriate changes in the number of levels were made to the regulation on the national framework by Cabinet of Ministers in 2019. Also, the integral competence was excluded from the list of descriptors. So we've got only 4 descriptors. But at the same time, it became quite obvious that it is necessary to abandon the bad practice of changing the framework due to changes in legislation, especially in educational legislation. And given the fact that in the vast majority of European countries, the national frameworks correspond to the European Qualification Framework, we should do the same in Ukraine. So as a result, in June 2020, so only three months ago, we have got the latest, and I hope the final version of the National Qualification Framework. As you see, now we have 8 levels and 4 descriptors. The slide also presents the positioning of existing academic qualifications in a new framework. Frankly moving, we have some misunderstandings, some difficulties and strangeness as for the positioning of these qualifications into National Qualification Framework. For example, at the level H, as you see, we have both the qualification of Doctor of Science and Doctor of Philosophy, Doctor of Arts. according to other educational law on educational, these qualifications, Doctor of Science and other two, Doctor of Philosophy, Doctor of Arts, belong to the different levels of education, and the qualification Doctor of Science is much more higher than, much more valuable than the rest of qualifications. But we do not have the additional level of national framework, so at present they are positioned at the same level, and we have to do something about that. What challenges we have now, what key challenges we have now with the national qualification framework? First one, implementation and self-certification. Formally, the Ministry of Education and Science has the main responsibility for this job. But according to the law, the National Qualification Agency, we, is supervising and monitoring the implementation of the NQF. So we will cooperate with the ministry to fulfill this job as soon as possible, to make other new national qualification framework efficiently used in Ukraine and also visible and operable in Ukraine. Second one, development of national qualification system. National Qualification Agency, according to the law, is directly responsible for the development of national qualification system, where the national qualification framework would be the heart of the system. Now we are working on the development of new legislation of national qualification system and developing regulations for its components. For example, regulations about the accreditation of qualification centers, and etc., etc. Third challenge is the development of new legislation on professional education. Now the ministry is developing a new legislation on professional regulation, and we understand we really need to integrate into a single system existing professional and professional education. Appropriate educational should be allocated in levels 2, 3, 4, and 5 of national qualification frameworks. And last but not least is the challenge concerning the development of sectoral qualification frameworks. And I would like to talk in more detail. Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you. The idea of using sectoral frameworks as intermediaries between meta frameworks and programs in individual subject areas appeared about 15 years ago and was firstly developed in the Tuning project. At the beginning, 6 sectors have been identified. You see the sectors: humanities, creative performing disciplines, engineering, natural sciences, healthcare, and social sciences. The main function of SQF is to act as a fixed standard for the level of learning required for an occupation or set of occupations in a particular sector. Sectoral framework should be developed by national government and or sectoral associations such as professional occupational grouping, etc. We have in Ukraine so-called branches groups, branches councils, and the quality of the sectoral qualification framework, of course, depends of adherence to sectorally agreed standard based on examples of good practice, including professional and occupational associations. During the years 2008 and 2010, in the framework of Tuning project, the first sectoral qualification framework has been developed. It was the social sciences, SQF. As you see, the subject area is quite huge. It includes business studies, educational sciences, law, international relations, and some others. And this qualification framework covers levels of European framework from 3rd to 8th. On this slide, you see the final publications concerning the first two sectoral qualification frameworks development under the Union project. It's the framework of social sciences and framework of humanities and creative and performing disciplines. Over the last 10 years, sectoral frameworks have been developed in a number of European countries. For example, in Poland, you see the Polish slide. They have developed several sectoral qualification framework. For example, sectoral framework for sport, sectoral framework for civil engineering and construction, sectoral framework for banking, and some others. The peculiarity of sectoral frameworks is that the number of their levels differs from the number of levels of national frameworks, sometimes even twice. For example, you see here Polish situation. SQF in tourism consists of 5 levels, in IT only of 4 levels, and in construction, for example, it consists almost of 8. It has 7 levels, covers the levels from 2nd to 8th of the national qualification framework in Poland. Of course, it depends on the range of educational professional qualification in the country, in each subject area. Talking about the structure of sectoral frameworks, we could see different approaches. For example, in the European sectoral frameworks, the most important components of each sectors are identified. They call them additional dimensions. You see those additional dimensions for sectoral frameworks for humanities and for creative and performing disciplines. First one has 8 additional dimensions, and second one has 7 dimensions, but finally they add one more, also dealing with professional development, with lifelong learning. Of course, afterwards in the sectoral frameworks, each additional dimension is described with by the necessary knowledge, skills, and wider competencies, and its autonomy and responsibility, first of all. In Poland, they use different approaches to the structure for different sectoral frameworks. On the slide, you see a description of level 7 of sectoral qualification framework for banking. This description is quite simple, in accordance with the descriptors defined in the Polish national qualification frameworks, and these are descriptors knowledge, skills, and they call social competencies. And the description of level is a description, looks like the description of national qualification frameworks, but it's detailed and uses the terminology of the banking subject area. But it is quite simple. Much more complicated is the sectoral qualification framework for civil engineering and construction. It contains 2 levels of description. First one, the general description we see on this slide, and second one is detailed description. The general description looks like the description of the previous sector. Also knowledge, skills, social competencies, using terminology of the subject area. They give the general description of the sector. And for detailed description, they use 2 additional parameters: sectoral indicators and a sort of additional dimensions. You see, they have introduced 4 sectoral indicators and 4 additional dimensions. These additional parameters create the table, a sort of table consisting of 4 rows and 4 columns. And for each cell of this table and for each level of sectoral qualification framework, they have made quite detailed description in terms of necessary knowledge, skills, and social competencies. So in total, this detailed description is quite huge. The sectoral qualification framework is fairly large document. What is state of art with the development of sectoral qualification frameworks in Ukraine? First of all, National Qualification Agency is by the law responsible for coordinating sectoral qualification framework development. It means that we have to develop the necessary methodological support and to help appropriate sectoral bodies and professional organizations to develop their sectoral frameworks. It is a big and responsible job, and it is ahead of us. Second, in 2019, a concept of sectoral qualification framework for the subject area education has been approved by the Ministry of Education and Science. They established 8 additional dimensions, and now they are working on the further steps. Third, it's about 2 months ago, we've got a request. We means the National Qualification Agency. We've got the request from the Ministry of Youth and Sport and from the National University of Sport to develop the sectoral qualification framework for sport. Now we have started this job, and we consider the result will be a pilot project for future developments of qualification frameworks for our subject areas, for our disciplines. And also several sectoral qualification frameworks for different industrial sectors, for example, for metallurgy, are in the line for their development. Now, thank you. Just a moment. Yes, thank you. I have completed my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Yuriy Rashkevych, for your substantial presentation. I hope there will be questions to you after your talk. And now we're passing floor to Olav Aarna, Academic Advisor of Estonian Qualifications Authority, and he will talk about formation of sectoral framework in the field of sport, the topic that Professor Rashkevych ended his presentation. So your floor, Olav.
Thank you, Tatiana. Dear colleagues, I'm very happy to be back in Ukraine, although virtually at this moment, but I'm looking forward to be in Kiev and elsewhere in the near future. Let me proceed immediately to my presentation. Do you see it?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, sorry. What about now?
Not yet. You should select the screen you want to share.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Maybe you can send your presentation to Natalia, and Natalia will do it for you.
Oh, sorry for all this inconvenience.
Yeah, it happens all the time, all these strange online platforms.
First of all, you should push the button to share, and then afterwards select the screen on the bottom of your screen.
Did it appear?
Unfortunately not. I suggest you to send to Natalia Markevich your presentation, and she will share it with everyone. It will be the easiest way, I guess.
Yeah. That's what I did right now.
Okay, great. Natalia, now it's your turn to work with this strange platform.
Is your presentation is opened on your computer?
Yes.
So you should push the button share, and then on the bottom of the screen you should see all your windows, opened windows, and then select the appropriate window.
Yeah, that's what I did repeatedly, but yeah, without any success, unfortunately.
It happens sometimes.
Sorry, it happens sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
Because actually I have used Teams earlier, but yeah, something.
Maybe we can use time. Natalia, are you ready to share with us, or you need time to?
Tatiana Valagina, I didn't receive the presentation.
Okay, maybe we can ask Carita to answer a few questions that she got. Meanwhile, we're solving the problem, technical problem. Can you switch on your mic? Carita, can you switch on your microphone?
Thank you.
Yeah.
We are all struggling. I was just saying, Olav, you have all my sympathy, so.
Yeah, it's always a problem.
While you are
Thank you, Carita.
We know each other from very far. Long ago we have met. Okay, I think I have had 3 questions in the chat. Thank you very much for your interest, and I'm happy to see questions. The first one was about because in our framework on level 2, what we call basic education syllabus, and I'm sure it draws attention every now and then. What does the syllabus mean? Our colleague asked, and it's simply a word that translation that we have chosen actually. On level 2, we have placed basic education, which is 9 years of education. Syllabus for us means that there is not really a qualification, the title of qualification when you have completed your basic education. There is no kind of you get a certificate, but it's not called a qualification, and this is why we call it syllabus. So it is the last phase, the final phase of the basic education. Well, now I see Olav's presentation is there. Should we start with that, or I can take the questions later? What would you suggest?
What would you prefer?
If it's okay for Olav, I think I can continue with my questions. Is it okay for everybody? And Olav, while he's concentrating. So the syllabus is simply a name of documents which shows that the person in question has finalized the basic education. Then there was a very, very important question about access to higher education, or it was written tertiary education, whether the level 4 in our NQF is the only level which gives access to higher education, to tertiary education, as it was written in the chat. Indeed, it does, and it's the only level that gives direct, clear access to higher education. I think the issue kind of lies in the question and in the fact that we do not have any post-secondary non-higher education sector like I think Ukraine has and many countries in EU member states have. We do not have this kind of level of education. We used to have something that was between university, higher education and secondary education, but we do not have this anymore. And I think this partly explains that level 4 gives access to higher education. And the question continued the difference between levels 2 and 3. Well, level 2 for us is basic education. That's the kind of big thing that we have there. And level 4, we had for a long time empty, so to say, that there was no qualification on level 4 in our NQF when it was first accepted and first prepared. What we now have on level 4 is some preparatory studies for general upper secondary school or vocational education, or what we call, there is a special advanced syllabus, again, certain courses for basic education in the field of arts, which is on top of basic education. So this is what we have on level 4, but these are not courses that would give access to higher education, as we call it. And the third question is very, I think, important from the point of this seminar. I'm sure all speakers and everybody present has many views on this, but the question was about key challenge in introduction of the NQF in Finland. And I think I started with saying that we had a good starting point, and the situation when we started this work was quite good from the point of the kind of main purposes what we have for the qualifications frameworks that we have identified as main purposes for the qualifications main framework. This was already somehow taken care of in our education system, so it was not at all difficult to get started. And I would say that the NQF didn't really bring any surprises to kind of general public in our in our context, nor to labor market, not to labor market either. But what has, for me at least, and it might be a bit personal, but I think colleagues could agree with this, is one of the challenges is that how to make it known for public, so to say, to people in education better, but in labor market, etc. How to make known the national qualifications framework more visible, more known. I think this is one of the challenges. One of the reasons is really that it's understood kind of very similar to education structure, education system that I showed you the picture of. But the one, I think, in coming 2-3 years, the key challenge will be opening up the national qualifications framework for other competencies, modules than full degrees. And as you saw, and for my slides are of course free to send to anybody, and you can find the same information on our website. We have opened NQF for certain competence modules, as we call them, and which are not full qualifications. But how far can we go? How far should we go? What are the needs of citizens? What are the needs of labor market? And how to kind of organize the access to be part of the NQF in Finland. I think this is, it's not challenged yet, but it is a big question that we discuss a lot lot in, and I heard something in the previous presentation which was very interesting, by the way. Thank you also for that. There are some ideas about this opening up the framework to other than full qualifications, that how far will we go and what is really needed and what follows from decisions we make for opening up the framework. So I think this is one of the key discussion points for the coming years. I think this was the questions I got so far, and it's okay. I'm at least happy to listen to Olav finally. Thank you.
Thank you, Carita. Thank you, Olav, for waiting your turn. So
no, thank you. I'm sorry. So sorry. Do you have my presentation now?
Yes, now it's perfectly on the screen.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Shall we go?
Yes, okay.
Okay, so dear colleagues, I was invited to speak more specifically about the sectoral qualifications framework in the field of sports, which is definitely not my field, but yeah, this is not a problem. But to do so, I nevertheless would like to start with a wider context. So I will also briefly explain how the Estonian qualifications framework looks like, about the conceptual model of a qualification, abstract qualification system, about the occupational qualification system in Estonia, because the so-called sectoral frameworks are essential parts of Estonian occupational qualification system. And finally, as I said, an example of sectoral qualification system in the field of sports. So let's start with the Estonian qualifications framework. It's an 8-level overarching framework which has been established already 12 years ago, practically at the same time when the EQF recommendation was adopted by the European Commission and European Parliament in April 2008. Our qualifications framework consists of 4 sub-frameworks, and what is not typical for most of the existing national qualifications framework, it consists both qualifications from the formal education system, meaning general education, VET qualifications, higher education qualifications, but also occupational, or we can also call them vocational or professional qualifications. We prefer occupational qualifications, which is more wide concept than vocational or professional. To be included into our national qualifications framework, the qualification needs to be quality assured or state recognized. This means that the qualification has to be developed based on a learning outcomes or competence-based qualification standard. For example, a national or core curriculum or an occupational qualification standard. And second, there needs to be an awarding body which is state recognized. Provided this framework, a couple of words about these 4 sub-frameworks. So the sub-framework of higher education qualifications covers levels 6 through 8 in our NQF. The VET qualifications, both initial VET and continuous VET qualifications encompass levels 2 through 5, and the qualifications from the general education sector are placed on levels 1, 2, and 4. And finally, the sub-framework of occupational qualifications encompasses NQF levels 2 through 8. Graphically speaking, the picture looks like on this slide. So on the right-hand side, okay, let's start from the center. What I haven't said yet is that a political decision in 2007 developing the Occupational Qualifications Act was to adopt immediately the level descriptors of EQF as level descriptors of our national qualifications framework. So EQF level descriptors are the backbone of our national qualifications framework, and the specificities of higher education sector, vet sector, general education sector, and all these occupational qualification sectors are incorporated already in the standards and procedures of particular sectors or particular subsystems. This is a specificity of our national qualifications framework. A couple of words about the conceptual model of a qualification system we adopted and which in principle can be used to conceptualize each and every qualification system you can find around the globe. So the qualifications system is considered to be an interface between the society, or particularly the labor market, and the system for lifelong learning. And in this interface, there are two important subsystems, functional subsystems. The subsystem for developing qualification standards on one hand, and the subsystem for validating persons' competence on the other hand. And in the core, or the backbone of a national qualification system, is the national qualifications framework. And all this interface and particularly the system for lifelong learning is functioning in the national legal framework. Besides national legal framework, there can be, and usually there are, some framework standards adopted. For example, the Dublin descriptors in the field of higher education, what Carita mentioned in her presentation. But yeah, there can be much more framework standards used in the national qualification system. And having such an interface, indeed, you can transform the needs and expectations of society or labor market into qualification standards, transform them into expected or intended learning outcomes in different study programs, educate and train people, and finally assess, validate, and certify their competence, meaning have qualified people. We call this, let's say, actually a circle, a competence circle. So having this conceptual background, a couple of words about the assumptions, what I made, let's say, preparing this presentation. Some of them relate to the conceptual model, and I am not going to repeat them. And just to mention that occupational qualification is any qualification associated with a particular trade, occupation, or profession. What is important in the context of our presentation is that sectoral qualifications framework is a subsystem of a sectoral qualification system. unfortunately, the role of qualification systems, especially in political rhetoric, is underestimated. People are concentrating on qualifications frameworks, which are actually, let's say, collections of, let's say, interrelated documents, legal acts and other documents. These documents and procedures become a living organism inside the qualification system. Therefore, I am always emphasizing the role of a qualification system. And what is important that sectoral qualifications framework is developed inside and by the sectoral qualification system. And soon we shall detailize what is the sectoral qualification system, particularly in the field of sports in my country. What is also fairly important, that sectoral qualifications framework contains qualifications of the sector which are relevant for the sector. And who decides what is relevant? For these purposes, the sectoral council stands. And all these brief assumptions are exemplified how it is implemented in the context of Estonia. But yeah, let me briefly explain how the occupational qualification system looks like in Estonia. So the labor market is divided into 14 sectors. One out of these 14 sectors is the sector of culture. And why I'm saying this, sports, the field of sports is a subfield of culture, or subsector of culture. Each and every sector out of these 14 is managed by a sectoral council, which is responsible for the same two basic processes described in the conceptual model. First, development of occupational qualification standards for the sector. And on the other hand, awarding occupational qualifications inside the sector. And as far as sectoral council itself is not an awarding body, an additional function of sectoral councils in Estonia is licensing awarding bodies, regularly licensing awarding bodies. A couple of words about sectoral councils. According to the Occupational Qualifications Act, the Minister of Education and Research nominates the institutions which are represented in a particular sectoral council. And usually, depending on the sector, the number of institutions varies between 10 and 20. What is also fairly important in principle is representation of, or balanced representation of different groups of stakeholders in these sectoral councils: employers, employees, professional associations, education and training providers, and of course, governmental ministries and agencies. Estonian Qualifications Authority, whom I'm representing here, or Kutsekoda in Estonia, is a support structure for the Estonian occupational qualification system. And this slide briefly, let's say, explains organizational structure of our system, which is highly decentralized. So, in the upper part, these 14 sectoral councils, but under these sectoral councils are sectoral occupational qualification systems with their own awarding bodies, and of course, behind that, education and training providers. Occupational qualifications councils responsible for developing the rules and procedures for assessing competence of persons, and finally assessment committees performing the task of assessing persons' competence on, so to say, on the grassroots level. The WGs here around sectoral councils denote working groups, ad hoc working groups which develop those occupational qualification standards which have been decided to be relevant for the sector. And not going into details, just a couple of words about our qualifications authority. As I already said, it is a support structure for the system. We are not developing occupational qualifications standards ourselves. We are not conducting assessment, validation, and certification. We are supporting this decentralized system, which has been developed since, I would say, 1997, but legalized in 2001 in the occupational first version of the Occupational Qualifications Act. The authority itself is a foundation in private law, which has been established by 5 founding fathers, so to say, Estonian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Estonian Confederation of Employers, and 2 trade union type organizations, and Ministry of Social Affairs representing the government. This was the status in 2001. Afterwards, in 2005, the Ministry of Education and Research took the lead in developing the occupational qualification system in my country. And nowadays, the governing body of Kutsekoda includes the representatives of these 5 founders, plus the Ministry of Education and Research and the Ministry of Economy and Communications. And not going into details, so our support means actually organizing and coordinating the activities of occupational qualifications councils or sectoral councils and these ad hoc working groups, counseling and assisting these 100+ awarding bodies. And currently, one of our major tasks is amending or widening the scope of the occupational qualifications system by adding the functionality of labor and skills anticipation system, adding quantitative aspect to our forecasts of the future needs, not only in skills, but also how many people of certain qualification we need. And finally, keeping the register of occupational qualifications is our task. Now, finally, the Estonian example. As I already mentioned, the field of sports is subordinated to the sectoral council for culture. And concerning the awarding body for qualifications in the field of sports, it has been the Estonian Olympic Committee. It might sound strange, but yeah, this has been the case already since early this century. What is unordinary compared to other, let's say, sectors or subsectors, usually there is one awarding body and a single occupational qualifications council. In case of sports, it has 72 occupational qualifications councils. Whereas 71 out of them deal with different fields of sports or specializations. And one occupational qualification council is dealing with general matters, including professional ethics and awarding of qualifications on the NQF levels 7 and 8. And what I would like to emphasize specifically is that although, let's say, it is very important to have a solid conceptual framework, to have a well-established organizational structure, you can't neglect the role of individuals in developing a good system. And in this particular case, developing a solid sectoral qualification system in the field of sports has been a mission of Mr. Toomas Tõnise, who is a vice president of the Estonian Olympic Committee on one hand, and on the other hand, for the last 15 years, he has been repeatedly re-elected to be chairman of the Sectoral Council for Culture. And I must admit, Toomas has indeed put a huge amount of energy in developing and promoting this sectoral qualification system in the field of sports. Now going into details, this sectoral framework for sports includes 6 occupational qualifications. These are 6 levels of coaches' occupation with, let's say, different names, starting with assistant and ending with elite coach. And if you probably mentioned on the slide about our NQF, so we have also occupational qualifications on level 8, and then in the field of sports, the title is elite coach. You can find descriptions of these occupational qualifications. Actually, you find the occupational qualification standards in English if you go to this link, and I am absolutely sure that the organizers will distribute our slides among the audience after this webinar. What is quite interesting is that, as you can imagine, it's impossible and not practical at all to develop standards for 71 specializations. So the decision has been from the beginning to develop occupational qualification standards for coaches, generic standards on 6 levels. But personal competence of applicants is assessed and validated in the context of his or her specialization. Therefore, this assessment, validation, and certification is basically done by these specialized awarding bodies. not awarding bodies, but specialized occupational qualification committees. And occupational qualification certificate issued after successful validation describes both the title, generic title of qualification, its level, and also specialization. Like in this example, seniors coach level 6 in volleyball. And what is not typical for our almost 600 different occupational qualifications in the field of sports, all these occupational qualification certificates also can serve as licenses to practice coaching. And this is because the field of sports is regulated by Sport Act, particularly the coach profession is a regulated profession, meaning that to practice it, you should have an occupational qualification certificate issued by this state-recognized awarding body, in this case, Estonian Olympic Committee. It is also based on this act, it is also recognized relevant professional qualifications awarded outside Estonia, and this is based on the recognition of Foreign Professional Qualifications Act. And in that case, the competent authority will be the Ministry of Culture, not the Estonian Olympic Committee, which is also quite extraordinary for the field of sports, is that based on the same Sport Act, a sports database has been developed and is available also in English, where you can find, let's say, the names and qualifications of all 3,000 plus coaches certified and having, let's say, valid certificates, qualification certificates. And finally, based on the same law, a sports organization can apply for state subsidy, which means half of the coach's salary if it employs a coach with a qualification on the SQF level 5 or higher. So persons who have lower qualifications on level 3 and 4, if you employ such, let's say, lower qualification coaches, you are not entitled for state subsidy, but yeah, for higher levels of coaches, this is an option for sports organizations. So this is a brief description of sectoral framework for in the field of sports in Estonia, and probably one additional comment is that these 6 qualifications don't have immediate contact with, let's say, study programs in the field of sports. So they are full-fledged occupational qualification standards, although, let's say, prior learning is also important to be validated during this certification process. Thank you for your attention, and once again, sorry for these technical problems.
Sorry, it's our part as well. Thank you, Olav, for your detailed presentation. It's really interesting how all these sub-frameworks, different occupational qualification councils cooperate and how this very detailed system works. Thank you. We have a number of questions from participants. Who is going to pick up floor? Professor Rashkevych?
Yes,
Maybe
I've got
your
two
turn.
questions.
Mm-hmm.
Can I answer? I got two questions concerning my presentation. First one from Sergei Stepenko. I wonder if I understood Professor Rashkevych correctly regarding to do something about both PhD and doctoral science on the same level. Did you mean the further changes in the qualification levels are possible? I will tell you my personal opinion, as I know, this opinion is shared by a lot of specialists. First point, that we should preserve the scientific degree Doctor of Science. Second, we should eliminate the level of Doctor of Science from the law on education, because the preparation to the level to the Doctor of Science does not contain the education, the formal education. It's a pure research. Third point, we should reallocate all the regulations concerning the Doctor of Science from the law on education or from the law on higher education to the law on science and scientific activity. And confirmation, a sort of confirmation about that. The same problems had our Polish colleagues 10 years ago, while they were developing their national qualification framework. And they did in the same way. They preserved the scientific degree Doctor of Science, Doctor Habilitovane, but they did not include that qualification into their national qualification framework. It's a title, it's a research title which stands alone apart from the national qualification framework. And finally, we should not change in future our national qualifications frameworks. Now it corresponds to the European qualifications frameworks, and we should put the final dot, the final point about the process on the process of development of a structure of a qualification framework. So it's my personal opinion. And second question was from Tatiana Valerievna. In your opinion, what should be the links between national qualification frameworks, sectoral qualification framework, and professional education standards? I would answer as follows. The sectoral qualification framework should serve as an umbrella, as a real framework for development both educational and professional vocational standards and programs. What I mean, each specialist, each professional should have competencies, not only quite narrow competencies dealing with his or her narrow specialization. For example, if I am electrical engineer, I am first of all engineer, so I have to have some competencies in engineering. And sectoral qualification framework, for example, engineering, should define these obligatory professional competencies which could help each engineer. And afterwards, of course, more narrow professional competence should be reflected in a professional educational standards. So this is my answer to this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rashkevych. We also have a few questions about Estonia. Olav, can you pick up your question?
Actually, I assume Sergei Stepenko asked, but I assume I have answered the question in the end on the last slide of my presentation, because he already expressed his gratitude to me. Suur aitäh, Olav. This is in Estonia, but yeah, if Sergei or somebody else has additional question, probably they can ask orally as well.
We also have questions from Maxim Drozach. How were workers' occupations set up into several national qualification levels in Estonia or Finland? Something like occupations of plumber, etc.
I would say the picture is similar to what you have seen on one of the last slides of Professor Rashkevych, where he gave examples of different sectors from different countries. So again, this is a task of a particular sectoral council to decide on which levels and how many different qualifications inside one profession or one occupation you need. Doesn't matter whether it is engineer or plumber or teacher or whatever other professions or occupations or occupational groups.
Thank you, Olav. It's still continuation of discussion. Yeah, Maxim wants to say something. Yeah, please. I can see your hand.
Yeah, and now
you can talk. Yeah.
It's okay for now?
Yeah.
So the problem in Ukraine is actually that every labor profession, that plumber, for example, or something like that, has to be set an individual concept, to set it up into an individual level of the NQF. So we here, for now, is not ready to make a common concept for all labor occupations. And even the hardest problem is that we can't place a plumber and a teacher on the same level, because teacher has higher education, it's maybe a bachelor or even a master. So it is at least the 7th level of our NQF. And the plumber, actually, it may not have an education at all. It can complete some courses or leave an education without having a completely qualification. So that's a problem. If it is easy in Ukraine to separate professions that requires higher education, for example, the teacher, doctor, and so on, it's easy. But if we come to labor professions, and even to labor professions that have different qualification levels, one profession may have different qualifications. So that's a very, very big issue in Ukraine. So I'd be very glad to get a piece of advice from our foreign participants. Maybe they have such an experience and established the ways to decide this, to solve this issue.
Okay, I can start, and probably Carita will add word. So, Maxim, I'm afraid you somewhat misunderstood what I said. I was not saying that the qualifications of teacher, engineer, and plumber will be placed on the same level. For me, the idea of Yuriy's slide was that the qualifications in different sectors or in different, let's say, groups of professions, of occupations are placed on neighboring levels of EQF, but these groups can be placed on different let's say, sectors of NQF, if you think graphically. So, for example, I assume that the qualifications of plumber could be placed, for example, on levels 3, 4, and 5. 5, conditionally speaking, varies the qualifications of engineer and teacher on levels 3, 6, 7, and 8. For example, varies. This doesn't mean that teacher or let's take an example of chartered engineer in our case in Estonia. This doesn't mean that chartered engineer needs to have a PhD degree. He or she is a top professional in the field of engineering. That's the point. And there is no one-to-one correspondence between the qualifications from formal education system and these occupational qualifications. So occupational qualifications can be and usually are a mixture of different kind of learning, including formal learning, but also non-formal and informal learning. That's why NQF and EQF are qualifications framework for lifelong learning, not only qualifications from formal education system or traditional qualifications.
Thank you, Olav. Carita, can you add something to that from experience of your country?
Thank you very much. Indeed, I thank you for the question. I don't think I'm in a position to give advice, but at least I can try to open a little bit very shortly how we see the very interesting and always popping up question concerning the link between certain occupation like plumber, which has been mentioned, qualification, and the qualifications framework, how we see it in Finland. And I'm sure you will have better and more detailed information in the future when the project will go on. First, I wanted to emphasize that in Finland, vocational qualifications are developed in close cooperation with the working life. But they do not prepare, in most cases, they do not prepare for certain occupation, but rather the qualification content in Finland is very broad to kind of respond to the needs of the working life. So, and this is also visible in the National Qualifications Framework, that we do not, the idea is not to prepare a person for certain occupation, but rather to give more other kinds of competencies as well for this person. You can also acquire these competencies in different ways. The key is the assessment. It's not important how you have learned in some cases, but rather that you can demonstrate the skills needed in a working place situation. So this is how it works. And on our website of the organization, you can find, if you are interested, you can find the qualification requirements for certain qualifications and certain fields of labor market, etc. Also in English, it's called like electronic requirements. They are all available, many of them also in English. So we do not see clear link between certain occupation and qualification. There might be exceptions, but in the majority of cases, I would say this is the approach we have in Finland. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Was it clear? More or less. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, recommendations? We still have a few minutes. Okay. Anyone raising hand? So let me summarize. So we had three presentations today. The first one was from Finland and about experience of introduction since 2017. I was actually surprised that it's so young, national qualification frameworks. And you provided us different examples with the different specialists, different levels, with names of occupations fitted to these levels. And you also presented a few challenges, and I pick up your idea about making this national qualification framework more visible, more understandable to market, to population. It's still an issue because sometimes even experts don't understand these ideas of national qualification framework. Professor Rashkevych presented us the history of Ukrainian national qualification system. It's long way in comparison to Finland. I would say crooked, curling way, if we put it politely, and challenging, including necessity in further cooperation with Ministry of Education and reviewing educational levels in Ukraine. And we also discussed some sectoral framework development, and it was very interesting for me to look on Polish experience in development sectoral framework, and some lessons that could be learned by Ukraine and other countries, how we can do that. While Olav presented us very detailed, very fragmented, in my mind, system of national qualifications in Estonia, the sub-framework, different system of development, validation of qualifications, different approaches in sectoral. I was amused by this sectoral councils, occupational qualification councils, 71 occupational qualification councils for sports. It sounds to me like very serious, very grounded, very detailed approach. And I hope it works for the country and it really makes this national qualification system working for making vocational standards and vocational approaches and higher education approaches more understandable, more visible, because these qualifications are filled in by different standards, by different sectoral frameworks. So it makes sense for labor and for education and really merge two different areas in society. It's my short summary. Sorry if I missed something. Maybe someone would like to add something as a last word for this webinar. Carita, 2 words.
Thank you. I was just saying thank you. Excellent summary, and really, I really enjoyed listening to colleagues as well. So I find this discussion very, very advanced and kind of, if you allow, high level. This was really very interesting time for me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Olav, would you say something to us as a final word at the moment? He's not with us. Pane Yuriy.
Sorry, my microphone was muted, so I just wanted also to thank you all for this possibility to meet you virtually. And as I understand, this was the first meeting, but far not the last one. So this is inception meeting, so to say. I'm looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yuriy Mikhailovich, are you with
Thank
us?
you very much, because it's my opinion. I think our seminar, our webinar was very useful for everybody, not only for Ukrainian participants, but also for our foreign international colleagues. And I hope I'm looking forward for international cooperation in our developments, both at the level of national qualification framework, but at the level of development of sectoral qualification frameworks, particularly in sports, which is our issue today's task. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. On behalf of National Qualification Agency, I would like to say grateful words to all speakers and to all participants. We had more than 30 participants staying for nearly 2 hours. It's a long time today. I hope our speakers wouldn't mind if we share presentations on the website of National Qualification Agency, and we'll see how this recording works. Maybe we'll share a video as well, if you are not.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay. And I'm kindly invited everyone to the next webinar. I hope it will be in a few weeks. And we're going to talk about vocational professional standards, experience of different European countries. So thank you everyone, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.